John, how much further forward are we today? Theresa May has laid out the timeline for her departure, but we don't know who the next Prime Minister is going to be. We don't know who that person is going to select as the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's going to be at number 11. We don't know who that person is going to select to be the Governor of the Bank of England. We don't know ultimately if we're heading for a general election this year. Was today a step forward, John?
Well, we'll discover sooner or later whether it is a step forward or not, because a lot will depend on who gets chosen. But I suppose it is a kind of clearance, at least, as you've had this week. Some people would say it's much longer than a week of people just waiting for May to go. And in the end, obviously, it became too much for her. But at the moment, I think it's interesting that these people are pushing forward. But the level to which people are expecting Boris Johnson to win is actually, I think, by itself quite intriguing, because that tends to say that the Tory party want to go behind a Brexiteer. And then you have all the difficulties about what that means. And I think your list of all the things we don't know, Guy, that essentially is what people are just coming to terms with. Everyone has just been looking at this woman and thinking, much longer is she going to go on for? Is there going to be another of these wretched votes? And now suddenly that's all gone, and there's, to some extent, a kind of tabula rasa, blank sheet for people to write on.
Well, let's talk for just a second about her legacy. And, I use that term loosely, but she has been Prime Minister for 2 years and 300 odd days. I mean, there are 4 Prime Ministers that have served shorter periods.
The answer is very, very little. I mean, you think all the times, your and my appearances here pretty much catalogue this long, dreary road where actually very little has happened. You know, she came in, she had that brief honeymoon period. She then became the latest of these series of people who make a gamble about Brexit. Boris Johnson, David Cameron, a whole series of people made gambles about Brexit and they went wrong. May's gamble was to call an election, and that went wrong. And she was immediately, from that point, in a difficult position where she didn't have an absolute majority. And I think she also made one big strategic mistake, is she never sort of said, look, I represent a country that has voted for Brexit, but which there's a substantial, nearly half the country voted against it. And even amongst the Brexiteers, it's unclear how many of them really want a hard Brexit. And instead of which, she set out and said, look, I want to not be part of the customs union, not be part of the single market. I want to get out of all these things. And so, in a sense, she tried to come up with a deal that suited a quarter, a third, whatever it is of the country. And she didn't do that thing of bringing everyone together. So I think that will probably be the element when people look back at it. And the interesting thing about Boris Johnson is he had this supreme advantage of many people say he doesn't believe in anything, but at the very least, people are prepared to believe that he doesn't believe in anything. So therefore, people think they can draw on him their hopes and fears in a way they couldn't really do for Theresa May.
John, are we really facing a kind of a blank piece of paper? Is that what is in front of us right now? Because I look at the arithmetic in the House of Commons and I wonder really what will ultimately change for Boris Johnson. Privately, he talks about this Canada Plus deal, but the EU has pretty much said that is never, ever going to happen. Then he talks about this idea that we could ultimately see, therefore, a no-deal Brexit. There isn't the parliamentary mass behind that. So at that point, you reach a kind of a stalemate, and you wonder whether or not ultimately the UK this year is either heading for a second referendum or a general election.
I think that's the crucial point. I think in the end, your reading is absolutely right. I think Johnson may be able to create, and again, we're making an assumption that it will be Johnson. We come back to that in a second. But if it is him, I think he will go to Europe. And the one thing which is true of Boris is that he's relatively popular in quite a lot of Britain. The place where he's not popular in any part of is Europe. And so I think he will get a much, much frostier reception than May did, and he'll likely get sent back. And then I think you're right, he will face this choice. You either go for a referendum or you go for an election. And you'll find quite a lot of Remainers who have come round to Johnson on the basis of 2 things. One, they think that he is the only person who can get rid of Corbyn, who many people regard as even more dangerous than Brexit, especially from the business community. But the second thing is that they think that he is this person who might conceivably turn around and say, let's have a second referendum, let's have a way of just clearing this all up. And he has that huge advantage, which May didn't, of being a Brexiteer.